Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom.
It's our literature unit, and it's day 2. Day 1, we started our book. We focused on our book called The House on Mango Street. It's a great book for adolescents especially because they'll understand a lot of the feelings and situations that are written about in this book. So we've got our character Esperanza Cordero. She's in a poor neighborhood in Chicago, and she has just moved into her 4th home, and she's not feeling very comfortable there. It's kind of old. The bricks are crumbling, and she wanted a big backyard, a spacious backyard. Instead, it's tiny, and they've got these tiny trees. So she's settling in, and she proves herself to be a keen observer, which just means she's really good at looking at people, reading them, seeing what they're like, and she kind of writes down her thoughts. So her book has different chapters. Now, this isn't an autobiography. This is fiction, but it is based on our author's experiences growing up, too. So she's Mexican. She's in a neighborhood that has a lot of different races. They're the Black community. There's the Puerto Ricans. And even though they're Latino, they consider themselves to be different from the Mexicans. Anyway, there's a lot of racism going on. She talks about how people are judged on their looks, their outside. Remember, we're supposed to judge people on the character that they have inside. But she gets to know the neighborhood, and she says, if you knew the guys standing on the street corner that kind of look rough and tough, you would understand they're not all bad guys. So we're going to keep talking about Esperanza. When we left her, we learned that she was really good with language. That's kind of her thing, right? And she likes to write down her thoughts in the form of poetry. Our author is really, really good. I read some of her stuff. It's quite beautiful. So she has a dream of being a writer. She wants to make enough money to get out of that poor neighborhood and make her dreams come true. So we're going to move on, continue talking about the plot of the book. But first, Tom, I think it's my turn to read, isn't it? Esperanza's community and her place in it are central to the house on Mango Street. Though she is the narrator, most of the book's brief chapters describe individuals around her. She lives in Chicago, U.S., where there are many kinds of people, but her neighborhood is primarily composed of Mexican families. Most, but not all, of the people Esperanza writes about are women. Esperanza notes early on that the boys and the girls live in separate worlds. She's talking about her fellow children, but all her stories of adults bear out her idea of a wall between the worlds of men and women. As the narrative progresses and Esperanza matures, she starts to think about breaching that strange barrier. She is attracted to boys and disgusted by them at the same time, both as she examines her own feelings and when she sees her friends starting to flirt and kiss. These feelings are complicated by the inequality of the marriages she sees, where women are often trapped at home. She describes many women as looking out of windows, sitting their sadness on an elbow. When Esperanza is assaulted by men while at a carnival with her friend Sally, she feels betrayed. Sally was distracted by a boy and didn't come to her aid. Esperanza is unable to express her anguish over the awful experience to anyone. However, she meets 3 older women who seem to see her pain. Though they don't directly address her trauma, they comfort her by affirming the beauty of her Mexican name. At the same time, they tell her she's special and encourage her to write. Esperanza leaves her encounter with them, feeling capable of someday leaving her community without abandoning it.
All right, let's get to it. Let's describe today's lesson and we'll explain it as well. We're continuing to summarize our featured novel, The House on Mango Street, which was published way back in 1984, but it's kind of short and it's a good story and you should read it yourself. Okay, now Esperanza's community and her place in it are central to the house on Mango Street. So that's the main theme here. Her community, where she lives on Mango Street, all the people who live there, and then her place in it is also central to the story here. So your place in something is the role that you play. Do you belong to this community or are you an outsider? What kind of role do you play? So that, again, is your place in this particular society, I guess we could say, this community. And those are the central themes of the novel.
Now, she is described here as being the narrator. If you're the narrator of a book, you're the one telling the story. So you'll see a lot of I saw this or I did this. It's written in the first person, the narrator telling the story. So most of the book's brief chapters, they're very short, describe individuals around her. So she doesn't just write about herself and her own experiences. She writes down what she sees is happening to the people in her neighborhood, too. We mentioned this before, but she lives in Chicago. That's where the book is set. That's the setting of the novel, where there are many kinds of people. But her neighborhood is primarily composed of Mexican families. So these are people from Mexico that have immigrated into the U.S. Now, most, but not all of the people she writes about are women. She feels drawn to the women in her community. Maybe she relates to them better. So she writes a lot about them. And you'll see that she shares some of the stories about these women if you get a chance to pick up the novel. We hope you do.
Indeed. So again, she is the narrator, but most of the chapters describe the people around here. And again, this is a community in Chicago. And of course, Chicago has all sorts of different people. And especially on Mango Street, there are lots of different kinds of people. But it's mainly composed of Mexican families. And most, but not all, of the people Esperanza writes about are women. She writes about the boys sometimes, but for the most part, she's describing the women there. And Esperanza notes early on that the boys and the girls live in separate worlds. Okay, so that's an observation she's made here. They kind of live separate lives here. Here are the boys here doing one thing, and the girls or the women are over there doing something else. They basically live in separate worlds.
They think differently, they act differently, they're different sexes. Typically you find that. But she does say that it seems like we live in separate worlds. They don't really communicate very well. Now, she's talking about her fellow children. Remember, she's just in adolescence. She's not an adult. She's still growing up. She's a teen. And it says here, her fellow children is who she's actually talking about. Fellow just means people that are the same age as you are, or the same status. Tom and I are my fellow coworker, Tom. I could say that. Or my fellow, I don't
Americans.
know. Fellow Americans.
Like Richard Nixon used to say, my fellow Americans.
My fellow Americans. Yeah, so you share something in common with them. So she's talking about the kids that she's growing up with in that neighborhood. But all her stories of adults bear out her idea of a wall between the worlds of men and women. This verb phrase, bear out, just means proves that something's true. You know, it bears out. It proves that it's true. There's evidence. It demonstrates whatever you're trying to convince people of. So bear out. So all her stories about the adults actually demonstrate her idea of a wall between the worlds of men and women actually being there. So there is some sort of barrier or obstruction that isn't allowing the men and women to fully communicate well. Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, she says the boys and girls live in separate worlds, but she also notes that the men and women are living in separate worlds as well. There's a wall between the worlds of men and women. And as the narrative progresses and Esperanza matures, she starts to think about breaching that strange barrier. So she's getting older, and of course, as we get older, we mature, or we become mature. We start to become adults and stop acting like children and things like that. So she starts to think in different ways, and she wants to breach that barrier. If you breach something, you kind of destroy that barrier. So she wants to bring boys and girls and men and women closer together.
Mature is sometimes pronounced mature by people in America. I don't pronounce it that way. Neither does Tom. We say mature. You don't necessarily become mature just because you grow up or get older. Some people can be 30 years old and still act very immature, which is the opposite. So they act like kids emotionally. Physically, they may be 30 years old, but they still act like they're developing emotionally. You could just say, oh, he's not very mature for his age. Usually girls mature faster than boys. But then the guys catch up with us later on. Yeah, so you can use mature also, guys, to talk about fruit. As fruit matures, it becomes ripe, and it just tastes better. If you pick fruit before it's mature, it's not very sweet. And that's why I love living in Taiwan, because the fruit is so close, we don't have to import it, and it's always so sweet. Yeah, so she talks about just trying to get through that barrier. That's what breach means, to make a gap in something. Usually you breach something by putting a hole in it. Or you could also breach a contract or breach an agreement, which means you break it. So just remember, breach means to kind of put a hole in something.
Okay, and we're going to put a hole in something right now, so to speak. We're going to take a little bit of a break and listen now to our Chinese teacher.
大家好，我是派老师。今天讲解的是8月份 Unit 14 Exploring the Meaning of Home in the House on Mango Street 第二天的课文。Esperanza 是这个故事的旁白 narrator， 它叙述的是生活周遭的人 individuals around her。我们一起来看课文当中的关键句型、文法与重点单字片语。好，请同学看到第一个句子 Esperanza's community and her place in it are central to the house on Mango Street。 请同学把 be central to 这个片语画起来。这里所指的是，到底这一本书它的重心主轴在哪里？就是前面的 Esperanza's 的社区，还有呢，它在社区当中所属的地位。好，接着请同学看到第三个句子 She lives in Chicago, U.S., where there are many kinds of people, but her neighborhood is primarily composed of Mexican families. 请同学特别把这个 composed of 画起来，由什么组成？接着请看到第六个句子，有一个重要的动词片语 bear out. But all her stories of adults bear out her idea of a wall between the worlds of men and women.Bear out 的意思是证实，这句话指的是，但是书中所有大人的故事都证实了旁白 Esperanza 的想法，男性和女性之间有一道墙。那老师再给大家一个 bear out 这个动词片语的例句，方便大家学习了解。All the experiments bear out the hypothesis. All the experiments bear out the hypothesis.Hypothesis, H-Y-P-O-T-H-E-S-I-S 是假设的意思。我们都知道，做科学实验做之前，常常我们都会有一个假设，做实验是要证实这个假设到底是正确还是错误。All the experiments bear out the hypothesis. 所有的实验都证实了假设。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
All right, let's continue with our summary of the house on Mango Street. Now, she is attracted to boys and disgusted by them at the same time.
Yeah, she has complicated feelings. If feelings are complicated, they're not very simple. There are a lot of different emotions or feelings that are engaged or you're feeling. It's not just a simple feeling. It's complicated. It's difficult. Yeah, so that's how feelings often are. So complicated could also mean difficult to figure out. Maybe a math problem is very complicated. Oh, that means it's really tough to figure out. It's not a simple problem. Well, your feelings are very involved and very complex as well. So that's how she's feeling about the guys right now. She is watching her friends start to flirt. If you flirt with someone, you kind of give them the idea that you're interested in dating him. Girls who flirt will probably touch the guy and laugh at his jokes and kind of, try to see if they can get the guy to ask them out. So they're flirting with the boys. They're kissing them too. And she's watching this. And she's not involved yet, though. These feelings of not always loving the guys and sometimes hating them is because she also sees the inequality of the marriages around her. Inequality refers to a situation where people are treated unfairly. So some people have more rights or better opportunities than someone else. You would say that there's a lot of inequality there between the men and the women. The women are often trapped at home. That's how she feels. And she describes many women as looking out of windows, sitting their sadness on an elbow. I love that phrase. I think that's amazing.
Kind of interesting. So I guess she's observing that lots of women are stuck at home being housewives and stuff like that.
Well, Tom, look, if you're looking out of a window, you kind of put your chin in your hand and you're just looking outside. That's what picture she's painting right there.
Right, and, they're not really happy when they're doing that. I guess they're looking out the window.
Dreaming of a better life.
That's exactly. Boy, why am I stuck here being the housewife and having to take care of all these kids? I love my kids, but still it's a lot of work. So, indeed, they're sitting their sadness on an elbow as they look out that big window. So, again, her feelings are complicated. They're made complicated by the inequality of the marriages she sees. Now, in the next paragraph here, it says, when Esperanza is assaulted by men while at a carnival with her friend, Sally, she feels betrayed. Now, in some countries, we have these little activities, which are carnivals that you can go to. It might be similar to an amusement park, but they're usually temporary. They only last for a couple of days, and they have rides, and they have other kinds of activities, and they have snacks and games and stuff like that. So she goes to a carnival with her friend Sally, but hey, she's assaulted by some men while she's there. Maybe she's sexually harassed or something, but hey, she feels betrayed, not just by the boys there, by the men, but she feels betrayed by her friend Sally.
Yeah, if you feel betrayed, it's because someone that you thought was your friend has not been loyal to you. And often some harm has come to you because of their betrayal. Betrayal is the noun form. Betray is the verb. You can also betray your own country by not being loyal to your country. Spies who are caught betraying their country used to be executed or put to death. That was the worst thing you could do. So, yeah, her friend, she feels, has betrayed her. What was Sally doing while Esperanza was being assaulted? Well, she was flirting with a boy. So I can see why Esperanza is really upset with her friend. It says here she's unable to express her anguish over the awful experience to anyone. Anguish is a really deep pain someone goes through. They're distressed. There's a lot of anxiety. Something awful probably has happened for you to feel great anguish over something.
Exactly. So she had this anguish, but she was unable to tell her friend Sally all about it, and she was unable to express her anguish to anyone else for that matter. So it was a disturbing experience for her that she was unable to talk about. And of course, when we have those things happen to us, we carry those experiences and those feelings with us for the rest of our lives. And of course, it can cause problems unless we talk to somebody about it. That can help. However, she meets 3 older women who seem to see her pain. So her friend Sally is her same age, but maybe Sally is not as mature as Esperanza. So she meets 3 older women, some adults here, and they can relate. Maybe they have the same experience and they can understand what she's going through.
Yeah, it sounds like she found some older women who perhaps had been through similar situations. And I agree with you. I think Esperanza sounds like she's much more mature than her friend Sally. That happens, you know. We learned early on that she is a keen observer of the people in her neighborhood. Usually, if someone is very good at reading people, they're very mature. So, yeah, she finds these 3 older women who can relate to her. And they don't directly talk about what happened to her or directly address her trauma, but they comfort her. How do they do that? By affirming the beauty of her Mexican name. If you affirm something, it just means you say that something is true, or you state your support for something like an idea or an opinion. And they tell her, wow, your name really is beautiful. You should be proud to have that name.
Indeed, that's always kind of shocking to me as somebody who wanted to study Spanish because I recognize that it's a beautiful language and a beautiful culture. So if you ever run into somebody who is ashamed of their Spanish name or something like that, I just can't quite understand that. How can you think that way? The name Esperanza is wonderful. It's
beautiful, yeah.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, though, she feels this way. But hey, these are wise women here. And they affirm the beauty of her Mexican name. Hey, you should, look at your name objectively and realize that, hey, that is a cool name, Esperanza. Not everybody in the world has a name like that. And at the same time, they tell her she's special and they encourage her to write. So yes, they tell her that her name is great, that she is a special person, and that she has a talent for writing, and that she should write more.
And she leaves her encounter with them feeling capable of someday leaving her community without turning her back on her community, without abandoning it. So if you have an encounter with someone, you unexpectedly run into them. It wasn't a planned meeting. You didn't set up an appointment. You just happened to run into some people. And in this case, it was a blessing that she found these older women who were able to relate to her and give her comfort and also encourage her, which is very, very important, especially as you're going through that difficult time of being an adolescent. It's hard sometimes to get those feelings from your parents because you're kind of at war with them when you're this age. But if she can find encouragement and comfort from some other adult women, yay. I think that's pretty wonderful. So she leaves the encounter with them feeling good and thinking, hey, someday I can leave here, but not feel bad about my heritage or where I grew up.
So she'll leave the community, but she'll still be there in spirit. Okay, that brings us to the end of our summary for today. Let's listen now to our Chinese teacher.
第2段里谈到 Esperanza 对于异性有矛盾的感受，一方面受到吸引，另一方面又厌恶。他也观察到婚姻当中的女性受困其中，坐困愁城。我们一起看一下这里有哪些学习重点。第一句 As the narrative progresses and Esperanza matures， 请同学把这2个动词画起来。Progresses 是不断的演进，不断的前进，意思就是说，当它叙述继续进行下去。And Esperanza matures， 这里的 mature 当然就是它长大了，变成熟了。接下来 she starts to think about breaching the strange barrier。 她开始想做一件事，什么事呢？ 去突破这个奇怪的障碍。Breach 的意思原本是指违反，怎么用呢？ When you are late in paying the rent， 大家都知道在外面租房子要缴房租。When you are late in paying the rent， 那房客缴房租的时候，如果迟缴了 ，you breach the agreement with the landlord， 那就是违反了和房东所签的合约。但是在这里 breach 是当作突破的意思。接着请看到第二句逗点之后，所以 both as she examines her own feelings and when she sees her friends starting to flirt and kiss， 这里不只是她自己的经验，也是从朋友身上观察到的。这里有两个副词连接词 as 和 when， 当她检视自己的感受，还有看着自己的朋友开始搞暧昧卿卿我我。好，接下来我们看到第三个句子。第三个句子从逗点后面 where women are often trapped at home， 这个 where 所指的呢，就是 in the marriages， 前面所讲到的婚姻。好，最后一段是 Esperanza 个人比较痛苦的经历，一方面她受到男生性侵害，一方面感受到友谊的背叛，最后她还是在写作当中找到了脱离却不背弃成长背景的方法。请同学先看第一个句子，这里的 assaulted， 那指的呢就是受到男性的侵害。那后面呢 she feels betrayed， 请画起来，她受到背叛。请同学写上 betray 有一个名词 betrayal， B-E-T-R-A-Y-A-L 是背叛的名词。第二个句子，她的好朋友 Sally 没有来帮助她， she didn't come to her aid，没有帮助他 she didn't come to her aid。 好，再来第三个句子 Esperanza is unable to express her anguish。 Anguish 这个名词指的是痛楚。接下来我们看到第七个句子 Esperanza leaves her encounter with them feeling capable of a Sunday leaving her community without abandoning it。 这里的这个 feeling capable of 其实是主词补语，是说 Esperanza 和他们相遇之后怎么样呢？他觉得自己有一天可以离开自己的社区，但又不至于遗弃他的社区，所以这里是主动的，我们加上 ing。 以上是我们针对第二天课程的讲解，谢谢。
That's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and join us again next time when we actually talk about the author of The House on Mango Street, Sandra Cisneros. Please join us then. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.